work on your packing. That was some advice from a fly fishing piper, I believe, some new gentleman I discovered. That causes most of your problems, and I believe he's right. Just like it's causing me problems right now. I'll do shout-outs on my next video. I've run into quite a few new people on the YouTube pipe community. But there's something on my mind that I've been wanting to talk about, share with you folks for a while. I read this book once upon a time, about 2 years ago, Retromania, Pop Culture's Obsession with Its Own Past. And it focuses mainly on music movements and the fashions that surround it. But, I don't know, when you spend a certain amount of time on Earth, and you're into stuff like music and film and television, pop culture and stuff like that, you notice things start repeating themselves. Like a fractal. A fractal is a repeating pattern. Think Scooby and Shaggy Doo running from the monster. And the same background is flitting past them. I know it's cheap animation from Hanna-Barbera, and I love Hanna-Barbera, don't get me wrong, but compared to Disney, those are some cheap cartoons, and you had to recycle some of the same backgrounds. Hold on. We're going to make this work today, I swear. Maybe not. Anyway, we'll try again, and then I will continue. I will not be deterred. Oh yeah. Packing is definitely my problem. For real. But at any rate. But yeah, I just noticed that certain patterns of pop culture just kind of keep repeating themselves over the time. And it's weird how the echoes continued forward. Like I remember back when I was a kid, 74 something, my dad and my mom were watching this show called Happy Days from the mythical land of 1950s America. You had high school students in Letterman jackets. You had cars at soda fountains where roller skating waitresses came on out and served you. I'm like, this is unlike anything I've ever seen before. My dad was really fascinated with it because, well, my dad technically was a baby boomer, and he grew up during that era, and he really fell in love with that mythology. I want to call it mythology, but that was the whole American ideal back then. You know, drag racing your car on a Saturday night, picking up girls, the whole thing. The show was created by Gary Marshall, I imagine, to thanks for bearing with me, to shake off the doldrums of, the Vietnam War, which was in its final throes right about then, and return back to a simpler, more innocent time, even though we know that no innocent times exist. It's all nostalgia. So, of course I grew to like that show and its spin-off, Laverne and Shirley. It was just comedy to me from a couple decades back at the time, in the 70s. Then, I'm growing up in the 80s. Now, we all know if you grew up in the 80s, you know what the 80s were like. But all of a sudden, I found the 60s were making a comeback. There was something called, remember the Monkees were very, very big again. They were enjoying another heyday. Also, there was something called the Paisley Underground music scene coming out of the UK. And it was basically like, Paisley shirts being worn, very, very British pastoral music. The easiest example I can give of that musically is the Dream Academy. Very, very Paisley Underground at the time. But the 60s, I just remember the 60s. During the throes of the 80s and early 90s making a big comeback. You had movies like, you had a lot of movies revisiting the era. I mean, everything dealing with the Vietnam War to, there's a couple movies there that Kiefer Sutherland was in it, but it's a bunch of people tripping out. The movie has a Volkswagen van on it. Can I remember the name of it? Of course not. But it seemed like the 60s were coming back in a big, big way. And then the 90s hit. Oh, not doing too bad here. Oh, by the way, housekeeping. Cornell and Deal's Autumn Evening in my battered old crusty cob, which was gifted to me by a gentleman from Indiana named Tom. So thank you, Tom. But of course, in the 80s, I wasn't paying attention to stuff that was going on around me. We'll get to that in a little while. So the 90s shows up. The 90s show up. And all of a sudden, oh God, I really have to master that. In the 90s, we get that 70s show. So now we have an echo of the 70s showing up. Because apparently that era was a lot simpler and more innocent and all that. Of course, it was like hugely caricatured, avocado greens and metal gold furniture, gravity flip Farrah Fawcett hairdos, all about that. So I just found that very interesting. And then of course the spinoff was the 80s show after that, which it wasn't the 80s time yet. The 80s, apparently, is right now. Thanks for bearing with me. Holy Smoking Pie Padre just got into Stranger Things, and he liked it. And of course, he says it's basically, he noticed it quite rightly that it was a melange, a mishmash of everything that was really, really big in the 80s. You have synthesized music in there, a la John Carpenter. You have the cute Spielbergian group of kids getting involved in something strange. They're all riding around on their bikes. The whole thing, you see this in It right now, which ironically when the book came out in the 80s, it was about baby boomer children from the 60s going back to the town of Derry in the 80s to fight It, the creature that had to come back. Now, you see the movie now, it's kids who grew up in the 80s, and now they're adults now, and they're going back to fight, well, I imagine in the next movie they'll be going back to fight the creature, but the 80s is very, very big. By the way, I'm into something called synth pop. And what that is, I have so much to learn. Synth pop, what that is basically music. If you've ever heard of a band called Kraftwerk back in the 80s, they were pioneers of the whole electronic revolution. I'm throwing these terms around like I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't. But it's basically like, the music that sounded like the future was supposed to look like in 1982. Like synthesizers, synthetic drums, that kind of thing. And from what I understand, this whole, we'll call it neon synthwave fad basically came around with the release of a movie called Drive with Ryan Gosling. It was a It was a movie designed to look and feel like you just went to your sleepy corner shop video store in the 80s, and you just dug it from the bottom shelf because you couldn't find anything else to watch. And it was designed to look and feel that way. And I have it on Blu-ray, and I think Blu-ray kind of defeats a little bit because it really wants to showcase that 80s murk and the neon, the whole neon noir vibe floating through the darkness and the fog type thing. The clarity of Blu-ray kind of defeats that purpose. I think it's out. I'll give it one more try. And of course, before I came down here, I had all these brilliant things that I wanted to say and all these observations of pop culture. But is it working out that way? No, it is not. But anyway. Here we go. I'll become an adept yet. But yeah, it's basically, you know the whole look. The 80s, like the Miami Vice, angular curves for the design aesthetic. If you just look up synthwave on the internet, you'll see all kinds of visuals for it, all kinds of music devoted to it. The first synthwave band I got into is called Compiler Bow, about 2 or 3 years ago. They owe a lot to Kraftwerk. But I just remember how much I liked that sound. I really, really enjoyed that sound. So, of course, when I see Stranger Things, I've only seen the first episode, when you have that red lettering and that creepy synthy vibe, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just like the 80s are coming back. But not so much as, well, yeah, music, but not... It's just hitting the mainstream now. It's just bubbling with movies like Atomic Blonde, that kind of thing. You can even put Blade Runner 2049 in that grouping. It's giving up more. It's giving up more of the layer to me. Good, good, good. And that's just finally bubbling up. But I think, like I said, Drive kicked it off. And Ryan Gosling stars in both movies, by the way, which is kind of appropriate. And if you're kind of curious as to the look I'm talking about, just check out the original Blade Runner. Everything's all rainy and everything's all neon-y and depressing looking and that kind of thing. That's the sound and the aesthetic that seems to be coming back now. But unlike... It seems to be happening in pop culture more than in movies and in television and in music than it does seem to be in clothes, which is fine because, I don't necessarily want to see 80s fashions come back around again. Even though on my prom picture back in 86, there I am when I had my full head of hair. I'm in a white tux with pastel blue cummerbund looking all like John Johnson, and I knew one day I was going to look dated, but I didn't care. This was my time. So I wanted to reflect the time that I was having my prom in. Yeah, definitely have to pack it better. Also wanted to mention, and this is nothing against baby boomers at all, but it just seemed like during the 90s, you couldn't get rid of the frickin' 70s, man. I mean, everything from Quentin Tarantino movies like, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, that whole 70s aesthetic was just coming up, and of course disco was rediscovered again. It just seemed like the 70s would not go away, the 70s resurgence in the 90s. But okay, I just shrugged. I said, okay, it's the baby boomers' time. Eventually the 80s kids will have their turn, and now we are. And of course now it just reminds you just how old you're feeling. When you see like the Atomic Blonde soundtrack, it's got, it's got like late 80s David Bowie in there, Till Tuesday, Susie and the Banshees, the whole thing. It's like, oh my God, it's 1982 all over again. But again, it's just interesting to me how fashion and culture and music, everything just seems to repeat itself throughout the decades. And as a matter of fact, I'll give you an easy example. There's like a Kit Kat commercial on now, and it takes place in a studio. All these people are like trying out fashions, and the music, it's very, very new wavy, it's very, very MTV, and the woman sounds, I'm not going to try and sing it and embarrass myself, but it sounds like a Blondie song, or, you know, a Pat Benatar song, and all the girls are like, you know, sunken in cheeks with the red blush and everything like that, and you have all these laser lettering things, and I love it, because I just like that sound, I like that look, I like that aesthetic. But again, it's just sort of like a... it's Madison Avenue coming round again to capture the nostalgia market, and I've always been the type of person never to. The past is a nice place to live, but I wouldn't want to. The past is a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, because I'm not one of those people that, you know. I never wanted to be one of those people that said, "Oh, music was the best when I was growing up. They don't make tunes like that now," because that's just not true. I mean, I'm into music now. I don't keep up with everything. But whatever I like right now, no, in this case I'm being a retromaniac here. I'm obsessed with the Blade Runner 2049 soundtrack. It's very, very stark. It's very, very synth-dominated. And it's just, it's good rainy day dystopian future music, you know what I mean? But, I always thought that kind of fascinated me. I just want to know if any of you feel like responding to this. Do you notice that in your own life? Like certain trends and certain... I know there's nothing new under the sun. Everything comes round again eventually with like a slightly different angle to it, a slightly different accent to it. But, I mean, how many times have I seen bell-bottoms come in and out since the 70s? At least twice. I just want to know, have you noticed that in your life at all? I mean, I know when we grow older we tend to stop paying attention to music, but... When I was a kid, back in the 90s, late 90s and early aughts, the Police did their reunion tour, and I loved the Police when I was growing up. But was I going to pay $120 to see them on tour? No, especially because if I were going to do anything, I'd take the DeLorean, take it back in time and see them then, because that's when they were in their heyday. That's when they were at the prime of their creative, that's their creative prime, the peak of their powers, so to speak. And, I don't feel like going to see a rock museum. I don't feel like seeing museum music, museum rock. I wanted to see Blondie because Blondie never really went away. They've always been kind of around, but again, I wasn't willing to pay like $80, $90 for tickets going to Worcester, Massachusetts. I did, however, go to see Bowie because Bowie, again, never really went away. He kind of, he backed into Tin Machine to lick his wounds after his career flamed out in the 80s. But then he came back with fresh new material, a brand new catalog, and when he went to the Verizon Center, which at the time was like a 15-minute walk from my house, I bought tickets for $70 with a big smile on my face because I love David Bowie. But when I was growing up, like, you know, like during the 80s and 90s, and I'd see like yet another Eagles reunion tour, and it was a farewell tour. And how many farewell tours have we seen from the Eagles and from the Who, you know, that sort of thing? I'm just sort of like, is this just another go around to get more cash? And I know music's a business. But, you know, after a while, it's just sort of like, you know, bow out gracefully, you know, could ya? Because Led Zeppelin, not my favorite band in the world, but Led Zeppelin had the class to bow out when at the peak of their critical and commercial success. And they bowed out right when New Wave was coming in, and they never really reunited. I mean, Page and Plant got together to do some things, and Jimmy Page did, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page formed the Honey Drippers, do a couple albums there to recreate their 1950s sounds they love so much. Plant did a bunch of solo albums, and now he's still just exploring his own sonic palette. He has no interest in getting back together with Led Zeppelin. He's all about moving on, and I love that. It would be so easy for him to like go on a reunion tour with Led Zeppelin and make millions of dollars, but how much money does the guy need? Not a whole ton, but anyway, I'm going on 20 minutes here, and I'm rambling, and this whole speech sounded so much better in my head when I was getting ready for it down here. But if you ever have a chance, just pick this up. It's a really fascinating read. It's very scholarly, Simon Reynolds, Retromania. It's a very scholarly study about musical movements and how they're being revisited, and how the past looks through the eyes of the present type thing, which I basically clumsily tried to relate here. But anyway, I hope you folks are doing well. I'm going to do another video in the not-too-distant future doing shout-outs and everything, because there's a lot of new people I'm discovering on YouTube and enjoying them. I hope you're well. Take care, and thanks for sticking with me for 20 minutes. Have a good one.